welcome to another episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Our hosts, Sri Rajgopalan, Peter V.S. Bond, and Brian Gildenberg explore how brands and retailers engage consumers in an increasingly digitally driven world. And now, here are the CPG Guys.
This is Steve Dennis, author of Leaders Leap. You're listening to the CPG Guys podcast.
Hello and welcome to the CPG Guys podcast. I'm PVSB, and when I'm not co-hosting this podcast, I serve as Partnership Acceleration Lead at Flywheel, a division of Omnicom that helps enterprise brands improve their SEO and SEM, growing their e-commerce business. My co-founder and co-host of the CPG Guys is also co-founder and partner of Think Blue, your key to unlocking your profitability potential. As builders, collectors, and amplifiers, they shape the future of commerce to drive your growth. Of course, I'm talking about my BFF, my unindicted co-conspirator, the father of music superstars Lara and Ria Raj, and husband to iHeartRadio podcaster extraordinaire Kavita Raj, parent to the three cats, Zora, Zumi, and Zane. There we go. Yes, the three cats who collectively have more Instagram followers than the CPG Guys. We are like, Sri, you are the low man on the totem pole in the social media influencing empire known as the Raj Mahal. He's the man known as Sri. Sri, what's going on? I hear last night you were at a big Hollywood party till about 3 a.m. What's the deal there? What's going on?
First of all, Peter, pleasure to do this week over week, episode over episode with you. Can't think of a better partner in this journey. You know, you almost make me think it's time we had the cats on the podcast and they can talk to audience. Maybe we'll get a bunch more followers. But in any event, thanks for asking about last night. It was the debut album launch of my older daughter, Ria Raj, who was American Idol finalist 2015. And coincidentally, Hype America and Geffen Records decided in my younger daughter's world that yesterday would be the debut single and music video launch of their first song, which is also called Debut. And what a beautiful music video was showcased. It's already crossed 1 million views in less than 12 hours, which is awesome. And it was a big night. And Kavita, my wife, also applied and got selected to be part of the 2024 Recording Academy class, which means guess who's going to go to the Grammys every year from now?
Zora? Zumi
and Kavita.
That's pretty cool. You may be the driver going to that event. You get your little chapeau and fire up the Tesla and go drop people off at the Academy. But that sounds like a lot of fun, Sri. I'm really excited. By the way, I wanted to know the party. Was everybody well behaved, or did Ria's party get a little messy? That's just a little inside joke.
Ooh, he's got the words right.
Her debut track was messy. That's a great
I was
song.
glad after the party ended to come outside and get in the car. You get it? Outside?
Outside. I got it.
It'll be better if we stayed hush and moved on.
Okay, we're going to drop all the references to her multi-million downloads from Spotify. Before we get to our guest, we want to ask you to help spread the word about this community we've created in the CPG Guys beyond sharing our podcast. Sure, you can share it with family and friends, but more importantly, your colleagues and industry contemporaries. If you're using Apple Podcasts or Spotify as your preferred listening platform, please leave us a rating. It helps feed the algorithm, makes us much more findable by CPG retail people like you who want to be educated and at the same time hopefully entertained by our witty repartee. We're witty, Sri. We are witty. We're happy that the CPG Guys is part of an impressive collective of highly rated podcasts, including CPG Scoop with Reese and Jennifer, and the super red, white hot, blisteringly fast FMCG Guys over in Europe with Daniel, Efrain, and Christine. They are killing it, over 15,000 followers on LinkedIn. They just announced links to our podcast, our sister cast, the social media profiles of Ria, Lara, Kavita, and the cats. You can all find them in the digital liner notes of this podcast. None of my family. You want to see my family, go to my Instagram page. Today, my daughter dressed up as a unicorn for camp, and she has her nails painted each with a different color on a different nail. So that's about as close as I get to the Raj media empire, but I'm doing okay. So let's get this conversation going, shall we, Sri? Most strategic transformations are doomed to fail for two fundamental reasons. Either the leaders don't aim high enough, delivering incremental change rather than something truly remarkable, and they move too slowly to keep up with the pace of disruption. Did someone say generative AI? Oh boy. The gap between what is required in a world of seismic shifts in technology and customer requirements and what is typically delivered risks putting many organizations on the road to extinction. I can think of 6 or 7 that come to name right away. They were iconic names in my youth, and they're in the dustbins of history now. Joining us to talk about leadership in this era and his new best-selling book, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, is the Dallas-based founder of Sageberry Consulting, which provides strategic advisory services to retail and consumer brands. He's also the host of one of our favorite podcasts, Remarkable Retail, available on all major listening platforms. I think you can even ask Alexa, hey, Alexa, play the Remarkable Retail podcast, and she will, which is really great. Please join Sri and me in welcoming, for the first time to the CPG Guys podcast, Steve Dennis. Steve, how you doing? Welcome.
Well, thanks for that nice introduction. It's great to join you. I'm fighting getting over a sinus infection, so if my voice sounds a little bit scratchy, that's why. But yeah, I'm happy to come on and talk about my new book and some other things.
That's awesome, Steve. Before we get started with the Q&A and really dive into this really fascinating book, and for those of you who are watching on camera, this is what it looks like. We'll tell you how to get it later, but why don't you give us a quick overview of what you do professionally? How do you spend your day? What's going on?
Well, it seems like it's getting more and more varied, but essentially my focus is primarily on providing strategic advisory services to retail and consumer companies, both brands, investors in the space, people sort of broadly in the technology ecosystem. I've been doing that for about 15 years. In addition, I've been doing keynote speaking. As you mentioned, I have the Remarkable Retail podcast. And then I've written a couple of books now. I spent the earlier part of my career, though, on the management side, almost entirely in retail. I started my career, and maybe we'll get to this because I think it's part of the inspiration for this particular book. I started my career at Sears Roebuck and Company, which I'm sure many people will know at one point was the biggest retailer on the planet, now is basically relegated to the dustbins of history, or more or less there at this point. And then several years at the Neiman Marcus Group. And my roles there are kind of bouncing back between operating roles, as well as strategy, innovation, what we used to call multi-channel integration. Now I guess we call it omni-channel integration or unified commerce, or I know these buzzwords seem to change every few years. So the through line's been really around growth and innovation, but as I said, mostly in the retail space.
Great. Thanks for that, Steve. In the digital liner notes of this podcast episode, we're going to have links to your LinkedIn profile, Sageberry's LinkedIn page, your website, Remarkable Retail on Apple Podcast. And of course, this is where I need you all to listen very carefully. Don't have to write down the name of Steve's new book. We are going to hyperlink to the book page on Amazon.com, where you can one-click buy that book. It's a great read. I think it's terrific. I absolutely ask you to go out and get this book. It's a best-selling book. It's doing very well. It's getting a lot of praise. I highly encourage you to do that. So let's get down to the question, Steve. Did I sell it well enough, Steve? Did I do okay there? Was I subtle?
Do you take Venmo, or do you prefer Zelle, or how would you?
Yeah, I think we're good. I think we're good. All right. So, Steve, shift happens. A little play on words there, but that's what you name your first chapter in the book. So what shifted in your life to make you change direction and ultimately to write this book, Leaders Leap?
Well, a few things. One thing I found with my first book, Remarkable Retail, which came out about 4 years ago, but I've been speaking about a lot of the themes for several years before that, was that a lot of what I was observing about what was going on in retail also applied outside of just retail. So one thing I thought about is, well, if I've got something to say, perhaps I can move beyond retail and talk more broadly. But the other thing, and really gets to kind of the center point of the book, is I kept, in various ways, even though I don't exactly phrase it this way in the book, I kept coming back to this question of as I thought about some of the companies that you probably had in your mind that failed to change, or leaders, individual leaders that seem to be struggling to stay up with the pace of disruption, is if the world has changed so much, why have you changed so little? And the you being the company, organization, but also in many cases the leader, because it's certainly not new that we've seen a tremendous amount of disruption across just about every aspect of our society and every aspect of business. But what is it that keeps leaders and their organizations from making the leaps they need to? And so that was something I kind of got into with my prior keynotes and with my first book, and we discussed on the podcast. But I wanted to kind of take a broader exploration of it because it was a topic that interested me. But frankly, I also wanted to challenge myself a little bit to see if I could go beyond retail, and to see if, even though I have a lot of leadership experience, I'm certainly not known as being a leadership expert. I'm not a professor. I'm not, somebody who's been focused on that area for a long time. So it was both a personal challenge, I guess, as well as something that was kind of a continuation of what I've been doing. I guess the other thing is, when I started to kind of look at the competition in terms of other books, there's quite a lot, and I'm sure many of your listeners will be familiar with Clayton Christensen's The Innovator's Dilemma, or Jim Collins' Good to Great. There are people and books that have taken this topic on, but they often take it on in a more academic way, I would say. And in the case of those two books, those were really written before, well, Clayton Christensen was really written before e-commerce was really a thing. But even Jim Collins' book, which is a little bit more current, before smart devices, before cloud computing, before 5G, and certainly well before generative AI. So, could I bring something that was maybe a little less academic, more inspirational, maybe a bit more pragmatic, but also something that was more updated for our current situation as opposed to 10, 15, 20 years ago?
That was great, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. I know this has been a while in the making, so Peter and I are happy to have you here today. Not just talk about the book, but also what you do, right? But specifically in the book, you refer to leaders who are often too timid in their efforts to transform their businesses in this very era of rapid change that you described. I've kind of been through several layers of that myself, working at PepsiCo, Johnson & Johnson, Revlon, most recently General Mills. What do you think is the root cause of this timidity, and why leaders hesitate to do exactly what you just said? If the world has changed so much, you got to look at yourself in the mirror and ask, are you changing yourself, as opposed to resisting it or having others do it for you?
Well, I think there's an aspect of what Clayton Christensen points out in The Innovator's Dilemma, is that a lot of times what makes very successful brands so successful is they have, to bring Liam Neeson into the discussion, a very particular set of skills that tend to have made those brands as powerful as they have been over a period of time. But then the rewards become, at least, this is very much my experience, that you're rewarded for more short-term performance. You're rewarded for optimizing, kind of doing what you've always done just a little bit better. So I think that's just one starting point. It is the innovator's dilemma of not being really incented or knowing how to disrupt yourself. But I think the other thing for legacy companies in particular is they don't really appreciate how fast things are changing. And they often do believe that a slightly better version of what they're already doing is enough. And I think we just see time and time again, not in every case, but that's often really wrong. I tend to probably talk about the department store industry a bit too much, but it's something I'm familiar with, and I find that even people that don't spend their time just in retail can relate to it, because we're all shoppers, right? So if you look at the U.S. department store business, not quite so bad in many international markets, but Macy's, JCPenney, Kohl's, all these guys have been in some form of trouble for 20 plus years. And the amount of market share that has leaked to various sectors, I mean, a lot of times people blame it on Amazon, but actually more market share has gone to other players than Amazon. It's not just about e-commerce. And, nothing prevents Macy's from having a compelling e-commerce presence, right? But when you look at what they spent their time doing, most of it is quite small in terms of any kind of real breakthrough efforts. And it's really about being a better department store. But the fundamental issue is that they're totally new business models. That's what's stealing share. It's not a better department store that's stealing share. It's TJ Maxx, it's Ulta, it's various online only players. So I think there's a bias towards inaction in general in these big companies, but there's also a sense where they're not really opening the aperture of what's possible or fully understanding how much change is required. I also think the nature of a digital world is that change fundamentally happens much more quickly. So that gets a little bit to what Peter talked about at the outset. Not only is it the degree of change, it's the pace at which you can fall behind. And I think when you find yourself, particularly in a publicly traded company or a large company that's hard to move, once you get behind, what it might take to catch up is often a hurdle that you can't overcome, either because you can't finance it or your board won't let you do it or your investors won't support it. So there's a lot of characteristics, I think, particularly with larger, established, iconic type companies.
I love that you took that one head on, Steve. The part that I particularly relate to, and I'm going to call it out, and it's not a one company syndrome, as you said, it's the large market cap traded companies, especially in our industry. They love lifetime insiders that have grown up through the organization versus external agents coming in to drive change. They bring them in and then they never stick. And the number one reason for that is exactly what you said, this lack of empathy and understanding of mass change, and the deep belief that minor tweaks will get the job done. And if in the most part that actually works, because the ambition is only minor growth to suit short-term growth as opposed to looking long-term. But the long-term damage that attitude causes is usually found out a decade later, and it's too late, as you mentioned. But I love that you took it head on. Peter?
Yeah, so Steve, the Meteor book really focuses on 7 leadership principles you identify, and Shreel and I will go through them in the questions we ask. Let's start at the top. You mentioned how leaders really need to crush his or her own ego, getting humble and embracing vulnerability. And in doing so, wake up to accept that there are new realities. And you use a really great example of a reference of don't just Google it. Like, don't just phone it in. You actually have to go out there and accept and investigate what those new realities are. So talk to us about getting humble and opening your mind.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why this is the first of these what I call mind leaps, and part of what I mean, just quickly in context, is that there's a different. If we think about the way leaders typically operate, there's one way of operating, at least in my experience. We have a kind of common way we're used to, and I'm suggesting you might want to think about a pretty fundamentally different way of operating. So that's kind of this mind leap concept. The reason why crush your ego is the first one. It's not a coincidence. I think it's very foundational. And, there's actually quite a few things I get to in this chapter, but to keep it brief, I would say, and maybe more broad, it's a little bit what we were just talking about, which is if you're going to change in a fundamental way to either be ready to take advantage of opportunities that are now available to you for all sorts of reasons, technology changes, consumer changes, societal changes, competitive changes, whatever it might be, you have to be willing to see that what got you here might not get you there. And in fact, I would argue, and I've seen this with some clients, that what made you successful in the past, if you don't let go of that, it might actually get in the way, that you're incapable of seeing. I worked with one company where it was a company that was very successful. The CEO was not only highly, highly regarded in the industry broadly, but he was also identified with fixing some issues in the company about 10, 12 years earlier. So he had made his name in this particular strategy. The strategy was very much running out of gas. But for him to say, my baby's getting ugly, was really an ego thing. And it was maybe related to where he was leaving a legacy and retirement age. And, that's not the only thing. But I think to be able to say, if you think about CPG, and I'll maybe be a little bit out of my depth of getting too far into the CPG world, but having been married to a brand manager at Kraft Foods, she was very much, the sort of skills that led people up the ranks of big brand management companies are not necessarily the things that are going to serve folks well going forward. In retail, a lot of people in senior roles that have come up through store operations, physical store operations, or up through the buying organization. Does that translate to more platform type businesses, more digitally driven businesses, thinking about retail media network? There's so many new things that are at the center point of a successful brand today that if you've come up, that doesn't mean you're not a good leader. That doesn't mean that some of those skills aren't still relevant. But I think we have to get very humble to be willing to let go of things to open up to new possibilities. I also think the other part of that chapter, which I'd mention quickly, is I think in a world that's changing very, very quickly, that is increasingly complex, we often, and I can very much speak for myself, like I have to be more humble that I don't know. I have to be willing to say, you know what? I don't really understand this. I, may have had a lot of expertise that served me well, but, in a world of new technology, younger customers, whatever it might be, asking for help, being willing to ask for help, being vulnerable to say, hey, I'm really struggling. But, a lot of times there's this kind of top down as the leader, I alone can fix this sort of mentality that I think can also get in the way of letting go of the things you need to kind of leap to the new areas that you must.
Steve, I absolutely agree with you. It sparked a memory of 20 years ago. I went in to meet, it was a Campbell's Soup, and I went in to meet with the fellow who had helped create the Labels for Education program. And at that point, I was working for a digital proof of purchase company that did codes on packs. So you think back to the days when Pepsi stuff and you'd enter the code in on the, and I went and I said, you guys have got to jump on board this. Like the way you're collecting your labels is you have the schools run these drives. Everybody brings in their soup label cans and they hand them to the school. You have no connectivity to the end user. The digital age allows you to do this very seamlessly, and they can still give points to the school, but then you control how that happens and you know who the buyers of your product are. You don't know that school came in with 10,000 labels and all came from one person buying 10,000 cans of soup or 10,000 people buying one can of soup. And it fell on deaf ears because he was a couple of years away from retirement, and be damned if he was going to change anything about the system that he liked. And like many of the, what were iconic loyalty programs, it's waned in terms of its overall influence. And it's like S&H green stamps. Like, where'd that go? It's gone, right?
Right. I was just thinking of the green stamps. Yeah.
Green stamps. So if you have pride and ego in something and times are changing and you don't adjust for that, you're doomed for the like I said, the ash heap of history. But Sri, question over to you.
Yeah, so at the time we had asked Steve to join us on the show, I had no idea that 3 out of 3 so far he'd hit upon all my pet peeves of corporate America.
Shri's fired up on this. Shri is like seriously, Steve. Shri would come back from work and just tell me frustrations that he felt in the industry, right along everything you've been hitting. So you're right in his wheelhouse. He's loving what you're saying.
Well, it must be right if we agree, right?
The ego one actually creates an internal echo chamber where often leaders, and I'm not going to take pot shots at anybody because I have been sitting on those benches myself of leadership in very large market cap traded companies. So I want to be clear, I'm not taking pot shots on anybody, but there's a truth to, as leaders, we often sit in an echo chamber. We want to surround ourselves with people who are all yes men and women, and will more or less, even if ideas pop up to the table, rally around what as leaders we think is the best decision. And hence the word hippo was coined. Without getting into a whole lot of detail, I'll actually, because I can go on for hours with you, Steve, about this, because I'm if anyone's enjoying this episode and listen to it 8 times, it's going to be me, if not 20 times. So let's
Sri, don't you have to be guarded? Don't you work in corporate America? Isn't that what you still do? Oh, wait.
Free unleashed.
But I want to talk about brand development in this era where I think you've correctly pointed out that there's nothing wrong or people aren't poor leaders or their leadership skill sets aren't good enough. It's just keeping up with the Joneses, aka keeping up with change. Most leaders haven't been afforded the opportunity to keep up with change due to the short-term reward structure that you described, which is usually 3 years or less. And hence, but the ego holds them back from wanting to learn, ask the right questions, and things of that nature. In that sort of era, if brands are to grow and the equity should continue to grow, clearly great brands don't chase customers. And that's what most large market cap companies do. Brands chase customers. That's what advertising is about, campaigns is about, trade is about. But the smaller startups, the word that has been created, which is very unfair, ankle biters, etc., and even private label to some extent, customers chase great brands. How does this quote exemplify the need for businesses to improve their targeting? And why should they connect emotionally like the good old brands 50 years ago used to do when they were all born and have overscaled at this point?
Well, at the risk of being a little bit black and white in my thinking, because I argue not to do that, but I do think there's an aspect in many industries where there's a bifurcation, and people make fun of me using that word too much, but there's a bifurcation between brands that are, all about massive scale, a little bit of everything for everybody, Walmart, Amazon, etc. And then there's kind of everybody else, and it's being in between, which was really the problem. So part of what I get to in the book is to say, well, the odds that you are going, whoever you are, whether you're in retail or, any other business, the odds that you're going to be able to out Amazon the Amazon of your industry are pretty slim. There may be a few opportunities, but when it's become so dependent upon scale and scope and massive investment, that's a really, really difficult road to hoe. So for the rest of us, I think it's trying to really improve the aim in terms of the types of customers you're trying to serve, and then finding ways to go really deep with them. It's a strategy I call special, not big. Not that you can't eventually become big, but I think it's to try to figure out how are you going to be the signal amid all the noise? Because obviously, as time has gone on, the amount of choice we have, the amount of information that's available to us, just the amount of just distraction and marketing, it's so hard to break through all that clutter. So I think part of the way you do that is you narrow your aim, you go deeper, you try to find those wow factors. But ideally, to what you were asking about, it creates more of an emotional connection with the brand because you have the customer feel like, okay, you really get me. Like when I'm just looking for variety and lowest price, that's one thing. But I'm looking for something special. How do you offer something that is really unique, powerful, that if in the ideal situation, not only do I have intense loyalty, so you don't have to bribe me with customers or loyalty points. I'm not saying that can't be important, but if it's about, one of the things I say in the book is you could tell that somebody's, you're just not into the brand because the only way that you end up shopping there is because you wait for the best deal or the maximum discount, or you don't shop unless you get that deal. So that's where we're really building that emotional connection that solidifies the loyalty, but also hopefully literally causes the customer to talk about the brand and spread, whether you use NPS or some other measure, but that creates that virality, that flywheel kind of effect. So I think it's hugely important. It's incredibly difficult to do. Like I've often accused of being a little bit too glib because I don't want to pretend that this is easy to do reliably. But it's also not, if you've gotten trapped in the unremarkable middle or find yourself not able to drive sales unless you discount like crazy, well, that's a pretty tough place to be as well. So it's kind of pick your poison, I guess. But I would say if you're trying to build long-term success, you're better improving your aim, going deeper, trying to build that emotional connection.
She's just not that into you. I'm thinking of the old Doobie Brothers song, What a Fool Believes. Too many brand managers and business owners think that about their brand, and they really don't understand that there's not an emotional connection and that loyalty doesn't exist. I want to remind our audience that we are speaking with Steve Dennis. He is the author of Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption. So, Steve, How does thinking radically improve growth and success, and why is playing it safe actually risky in business these days?
Well, there's a couple things there. I think one, we've seen over the last probably decade a number of businesses that have been wildly successful by basically redefining the basis of competition. I almost hate to talk about this because the idea of what business are you in is such a strategic cliche. But if you think about, say, the success of Uber or Airbnb, both those businesses, they were not better versions. Uber is not just a better version of a taxi. Airbnb is not just a better version of a hotel. They didn't, get back to what we started about at the beginning. They didn't take the standard basis of competition and just say, well, let me do an incremental improvement. They understood the ultimate goal or problem or solution the customer was looking for. They married technology in a way that delivered that value in a fundamentally different way. And so I think we have to, when I say think radically, is first of all, are you willing to at least consider blowing up the traditional ways you've done business, to think about different ways to deliver the kind of value you already do or the kind of solution you already do, but in a really different way? Or does that allow you to see adjacent opportunities? Maybe you're in a mostly product business. Now you start to add services, or maybe you're in a sell at a single time. Now you do subscriptions. So these are not necessarily like massively new ideas. But one of the companies I talk about is Netflix. And, it's really easy to think about Netflix relative to Blockbuster. Blockbuster defined itself, really it's just in the entertainment, they're in the entertainment at home business, but Blockbuster got locked in a very specific way of doing it. Renting movies, you had to go to my store to take them home with you, right? Then Redbox came along, then Netflix did CDs through the mail, but Netflix has continued to go, and add, different ways of solving the problem and getting into different sources of the value equation. And Blockbuster's got one store left, and Netflix is obviously an incredibly valuable store, or valuable brand. So I think it's about asking your question, what business am I really in? What solutions am I trying to provide? Are there different ways to do it by virtue of the way consumers' needs or customer needs are changing, by the way technology is evolving? And I think we see most of the valuable, or many, maybe not most, of the valuable brands that have been created and that are growing over the last decade or so have kind of remixed things in a really different way. The safe is risky part of it is in some ways, I think, a version of that, which is, while Blockbuster kept trying to improve being a better video store, the riskiest thing of all was not to have gotten into streaming, or not to have, it turned out what looked like risky decisions back then, their slow and steady approach ended up being the thing that killed them. So I think what we have to do is challenge ourselves to look at risk in a really different way, try to value the risk of inaction or the risk of slow and steady, if we're going to keep pace with the speed of disruption.
I love that. Looking at the value of risk, when you anchor it on slow and steady, might land you an outcome that you're never happy with 7-8 years later. And I'm convinced, Steve, if we fast forward 15, 20 years, and most of us will be doing other things by then, hopefully, a lot of us will look back and we realize a lot of this slow and steady actions that we took ourselves are the reason why certain brands are stuck where they are in a loop and unable to emerge from it. And unfortunately, at that point, we can only look back and hope that the next generation will do things very differently, which is do some radical thinking. There's nothing wrong with it. Use tech the right way in that radical thinking to create disruptive, positive, progressive outcomes for the world. So I'm going to now give you 2 favorite words of mine, because I think those are buzzwords often used in the IT industry, but have permeated deeply into commercial boardrooms. And those words are agility and innovation. Misused words. I don't think they're well understood, misunderstood words, especially in a commercial setting, because if you are one of those large market cap companies, you don't have the ability for disruptive change due to the short-term reward structure expected by your investors. How do you leverage, or how do you take advantage of agility and innovation in your success work streams in this era of disruption, should you in the first place?
Well, one thing I should probably clarify, and then I'll answer your question a little bit more directly. Sometimes when I talk about, I'm finding myself talking about leaps, I'm talking about safe as risky, thinking radically, might be a sense that people need to always be engaging in kind of moonshots or really, really aggressive risk taking. And, that may be appropriate in some cases, but I think in many cases it's going to be a balance. And the earlier you start and the more you develop a portfolio, the less risky your overall approach has to be. So I would just say that as context. And the other thing I would say, and the subtitle of my book is Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption. Well, that kind of begs the question, what is the speed of disruption? And I think it's important for, particularly because I can't give advice for every single industry, every single organization's situation, is to define what is the speed of disruption for your particular situation. And that will help guide how much innovation is required and how quickly and how much risk you need to take. So that's kind of a grounding piece. But as it relates to innovation and agility, first of all, there's a lot of semantics, right, with innovation. Pumpkin spice latte is innovation if you're Starbucks. And nothing against pumpkin spice latte. A steady stream of minor product improvements might be perfectly fine for many, many companies. But if the basis of competition is changing, if you're losing market share significantly to insurgent competitors or just other folks that are moving more quickly than you are, then what counts, I would say, as true innovation in your industry is going to be more significant. So you have to kind of gauge that based upon your competitive situation or your exposure to things like how generative AI might totally disrupt things in the next few years. I think regardless, for most companies, agility has become much more important. I think it is just too hard to predict. Like I'm sometimes overwhelmed, and people ask me a lot of questions about what I think about certain technologies. And, I've never been a true technologist to begin with. But I said, even if I was, what is required of leaders or advisors to try to synthesize and make sense of, things are just moving so quickly. And then you layer on top of that macroeconomic factors and other things going on in society. So I think, this idea that we're going to study and, hire the best consultants, and that's going to lay out a plan, a playbook for us that's going to last for 5 years. I mean, that's for most companies, that's just craziness, right? I don't think that's been good advice for a while. But it's certainly not good advice now and what we can anticipate. So then I think the question is, how do you build that agility in?
On that consultant piece that you just described, right? Yet some of the largest market cap companies, when they go a little astray or the numbers don't look as good as they want it to be in that 1% growth formula, the first thing they do is bring in that consultant to give them, and you actually bamboozle me by going to the word, give us a playbook to operate on.
Yeah, I'll add something here too. I remember at one point I was working on site for IRI, working at a CPG client, and we had just lost the bid on a program to do pricing analytics. And I went in to do the postmortem with the president, and I asked a couple of questions like, did we not do? Was our proposal not accurate? No, right on the spot. Did you not think we could do it? No, we thought you were probably the best people to do it. I said, so was our price just out of reach? They said, no, your price is about a third of the company that we changed. I'm like, so why did you choose the other consulting company? He said, because when our CEO tells our analyst that we hired IRI to do pricing analytics, they yawn. But when they say they hired blue chip consultant, they all start scribbling down and issue a buy order. And so sometimes it is that they just hire the consultant to do it so that they can show the street that they did it. I mean, it's crazy sometimes, right?
Well, I think that's actually a good example of where, there's this conservatism, belts and suspenders, insurance policy, because I think a lot of that extra money is not because of really tangible value. it's the insurance policy or the branding that you want. Same thing goes on in investment banking with fairness opinions and all these kinds of things. It's not because Goldman Sachs has that much more expertise than some other mid-tier firm, or that McKinsey has more expertise than any number of companies. So I think there's this whole thing which I get into a little bit in the book, but it's probably a whole other thing. Just as why there's this sort of industrial complex around covering your ass basically on certain actions. But hopefully if you're a leader that's really trying to get the best input and advice, you are more clear-headed, and maybe rather than just relying on the big consulting firm, you're relying on a series of different voices, because you're also going to get a certain bias. And I'm a consultant. I'm not fundamentally against consultants. I've worked and hired pretty much all the big firms at sometimes during my career, and have gotten a lot of good work out of them, but also not so good work. So it can be very situation dependent. But I think if you're going to really have the kind of leading edge insight you should be quite deliberate about where you're getting that advice, whether it's from consultants or just your kitchen cabinet or other people you bring into your organization.
The culmination of the book is a chapter you call The Big Leap. How have you taken your own advice? And you kind of referred to this at the beginning of breaking free of that retail corporate persona that you've been cultivating throughout your entire career. And, how do you feel that the success of that has been?
Well, I guess a couple of things. One is when I think about this book, and it's a little bit off your question, but I think it was kind of what I was pointed to in the final chapter, is this book is really a courageous leadership book. When it comes to it, like, there's a lot of specific advice around how to think differently about strategy, about how to not let your fear keep you stuck. But really taking the leaps that are often required really takes a lot of courage. And I would say in many cases, it's more courage than knowledge or insight or a set of technical skills, right? Because even with all that information, and I can say this about myself, I could say this about Sears, about Neiman Marcus, about other clients I've worked with, a lot of times these companies knew what to do. They didn't need Bain and Company to tell them what to do. They just didn't do it. So it's great to have a plan. It's great to have a compelling strategy, but if you don't act on it, right, it doesn't matter. So, I've seen where I've been hesitant in taking some of the changes in my life. It's often the fear that keeps me stuck. In writing this book, and what you're referring to in the last chapter, I started off talking about how when I was writing this book, even though I had made the decision that I wanted to get outside of retail, that I had made a decision I wanted to write about leadership and less kind of paint by numbers business strategy, I still found myself sinking back into my familiar patterns, to write in the way that I've written previously, to maybe couch some of my advice, try to build up more logic and lots of examples. And, I'll just sort of persuade you through the power of my logic and examples. And, fortunately, I had some friends as well as my editor and publisher who said, when you started this book, you said you wanted to sort of walk the talk, and, you're kind of pulling your punches and writing in a more conventional way. What about pushing yourself? So this is, I didn't write this book as a self-help project for myself, though it's turned out to be a bit of one. And it's made me really reflect in my career where I didn't act. I didn't take my own advice, or I just hadn't learned what to do it. So in a way, this book is kind of what I've heard people say, write the book you wish you had. And I think in many ways, this is a book that, it's kind of advice to my younger self to a certain degree. But it's also just a lesson that, even if I've got these ideas in my head, sometimes it's just easy to fall back into familiar patterns because it seems, it's that warm embrace of the comfortable or whatever. So I think it's a matter of just recognizing, as humans, we're often wired to do the least risky thing. And that's okay. I think many of us, as I've talked to people about the book, many people said, "Oh yeah, this really resonates with me," because I think we all have the experience of being fearful, having imposter syndrome, whatever it might be, being ridiculed because of not putting a new idea out in the world. So I think in a way, it's a very human experience. And what I tried to say in that last chapter is, me too. Like just because I'm writing this book doesn't mean that I don't suffer from a lot of these same feelings and situations.
It's heartwarming to hear that. And I'll wrap this up, Steve, by bringing us back to your podcast. You are an active podcaster just like the CPG Guys. You have one called the Remarkable Retail Podcast. Could you share with the audience so they can also join in and listen in to your podcast? Details of the show, who do you talk to, what is the show about, how many episodes are you in, and what the future holds for the show?
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, it was very much a COVID project. I do it with a guy named Michael LeBlanc, who's got a sort of similar background to me, though he's Canadian, so he's way nicer than I am. And we are about 200 episodes in. It started really to kind of unpack some of the advice that I had in my first book, Remarkable Retail. But I would say where it's grown to is we focus really on what are leaders doing to drive remarkable growth. So typically, our typical guest is a very senior executive from a high growth brand or a brand going through a lot of change. Every once in a while, we'll bring in thought leaders around a particular technology area or something like that. Like we had the head of retail from NVIDIA on recently to talk about the impact of Gen AI. But we really like to lift up stories of leadership, particularly in driving innovation and growth. And we're going to continue. It's a pretty successful formula at this point, so I don't know that we're going to be doing. I don't know if we're thinking that radically about the format of the podcast at this point, though we are mixing it up a little bit this summer with a little bit more focus on transformational leadership.
Well, I take offense at something you just said about Canadians being polite. Sri can attest to that. As a Canadian, I am not a polite person. So Sri's nodding his head. Yes, that is correct. I am not a nice person.
I was about to say on this podcast, we're also a COVID project. And I don't think on this podcast, the Canadian is a more polite one, although Peter can shuffle between Canadian and American depending on the day.
I guess that's true. Sometimes I can be downright ornery. I want to remind our audience, please visit cpgguys.com. You can find our 390 episodes. It's filterable by topic. So you want to talk retail media, you want to talk leadership, you want to talk AI, it's all there. And while you're there on the navigation bar at the top, or particularly if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and then write a review and tell us what you like, what you don't like, because we really want to hear that. And if you think you or your company has some thought leadership to contribute to our community discussion, drop us an email at contact@cpgguys.com. Maybe you can join us for a future episode. Finally, I will say thank you. Seriously, thank you to the 33,000 followers on LinkedIn who trust us to educate and entertain them. I mean, we're just so honored that you guys actually want to follow us. And Sri and I are walking around Cannes, and we can't tell you how, and I know Steve, this happens to Steve too, but we can't tell you how touched we are when people come up to us and thank us for what we do. They also often say to us that they think we're so much taller than they imagine. I'm like, how do you imagine height? We're on a podcast. You don't even see us. But we do. It's
like we have radio faces.
I know we do have radio faces, but we really, all the people that asked to do selfies with us at conferences. Sri was at Retail Media. I saw at least 10 or 15 selfies of you pop up on social media, Sri. Thank you, everyone. It means a lot. So, Steve, I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to tell us about your great book. And I'll say to everyone out there, get Leaders Leap. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other great book-selling marketplaces. It's a quick read, but it is a very good read. It should be in your business library. Steve, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks. I really appreciate it and enjoy the opportunity.
Yeah. So, Sri, what you think? Good stuff, huh?
Oh boy, I've got couple pages of notes here.
Yeah, let's not go through it all item. What are the things that really jumped out at
I
you?
mean,
Come
this
on.
episode, when I read the book, I knew how this is going to go. It's very close to my heart, some of my own experiences. So I'll go fast over here. Steve, of course, provides strategic advisory services to brands and retailers. Co-host of the Remarkable Retail Podcast. We encourage all of you to tune in and listen to it. Thought-provoking messages. If the world has changed so much, why have you not changed or moved at the same pace? And Steve took a personal challenge to be part of that change. So well done, Steve. And then we jumped into a conversation on leaders don't change much because of the reward structure being very short term in orientation of the reward structure, and that belief that therefore that minor transformation or minor tweaks is good enough. Legacy companies do not change due to that very belief, and that results in a bias towards minimal or inaction as the worst outcome. Then we talked about leaders themselves. I kind of chimed right in there. A foundational issue is the lack of ability to embrace vulnerability due to ego, and that the mind leap concept is nascent at best or barely exists at best. And if you're not capable of seeing what got you here won't get you there, it's an issue, and that plagues very large market cap companies to the day. Then we talked about a simple example and outcome of that is how in the retail world, it's possible that in a digitally anchored consumer, those that have come up traditionally in the retail ops way and still continue to get rewarded and come up in retail, they may not be the best fits for tomorrow. And likewise, brand stewards that walk away with Stanford Marketing 5104 MBA degrees may not be the best brand stewards of tomorrow. Nothing wrong with their leadership, nothing wrong with, I'm not questioning any of their skill sets. They're not bad leaders whatsoever. It's just change required based on where the consumer is going and adapting to that very change. Then we talked about the bifurcation of brands that have massive scale and then the everybody else and how the middle ones get stuck. And then how those middle ones really need to focus on being the signal amidst the noise. Uber example, we drained that quite a bit, where technology was applied against radical change for actually solving a problem for the consumer. All those three words come together, and those usually have the best outcomes. As we can see, who dominates the market cap, large stable cap? It's Apple, it's Amazon, it's Microsoft. Tech, radical disruption over the course of time. Then we talked about the value of risk and really wrapped it up by saying take moonshots, but take them early. Even the largest companies can carve a small budget, a group of people to go chase moonshots before it's too late. And we wrapped it up by saying, hey, on 2024 summer, we have more transformational conversations about leadership coming up on your podcast. So we look forward to that.
Great summary, Sri. Pithy, brief, but succinct and meaty. All right. Thanks, Sri, as always. Love doing this with you. We're fastly approaching episode 400. We did a big episode recording in Cannes that'll be coming your way extremely soon. So make sure you pay attention. It's another great one. We're doubling up on episode 200. That makes sense, right? 400. So if you go back to episode 200, you'll have a good idea of who episode number 400 is going to be. It's a big episode. All right. Sri, thanks as always to our audience. We really do appreciate your following us, and we look forward to speaking with you on the next episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Goodbye. The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.